If you had asked me a year ago where I'd be today, I would have told you with absolute certainty that I was on the verge of something big. My name is Martha, and for as long as I can remember, I've been chasing the horizon, not because I wanted to outrun my past, but because I believed the future was something you could build, brick by brick, with your own two hands. Picture this. It's late, almost midnight, and the city outside my window is a mosaic of golden lights. My son, Ben, is asleep down the hall, and I'm sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, heart pounding, as I send the email that will change everything. After months of negotiations, I've just secured the biggest client contract in Orion Tech's history. My hands are shaking, not from exhaustion, though God knows I haven't slept much, but from the kind of hope that feels electric, dangerous, almost too good to be true. I want you to understand something about me. I'm not the kind of person who expects things to be handed to her. I grew up watching my mother work double shifts, patching together a life for us with grit and a stubborn kind of love. I went to a state college, worked my way through school, and when I landed my first job in tech, I was the only woman in the room. I learned early on that ambition in a woman isn't always seen as a virtue. Sometimes it's a warning label. But at Orion Tech, I thought things were different. The company was young, hungry, and I believed it had room for people like me, people who didn't come from the right zip code or have the right last name. I poured myself into my work, fueled by coffee and the quiet conviction that if I just kept pushing, someone would notice, someone would see me. Tonight, as I hit send on that contract, I let myself believe, just for a moment, that all those sacrifices, missing Ben's soccer games, skipping holidays, swallowing my pride in meetings where my ideas were credited to someone else, were about to mean something. I imagined my boss, Jonathan, calling me into his office, a rare smile breaking through his usual reserve. Maybe he'd finally say what I'd been waiting to hear. Martha, we couldn't have done this without you. But even as I let hope flutter in my chest, there's a shadow at the edges of my mind. It's the memory of the way Jonathan's eyes sometimes slide past me in meetings. The way he introduces me as our hard worker instead of our star. It's the way the new executives, all handpicked from Ivy League schools, talk about culture fit like it's a secret handshake I'll never quite master. I try to shake it off. I remind myself that numbers don't lie, and this contract is proof of my worth. Still, there's a quiet ache, a sense that I'm always running, always one misstep away from being invisible again. I wonder if other women feel this way, like you have to be twice as good just to be seen, like your ambition is something you have to apologize for. Tonight, though I let myself dream, I imagine a future where Ben is proud of me, where I'm more than just a survivor. I'm a builder, a leader, maybe even a trailblazer. I don't know it yet, but the storm is already gathering on the horizon, and when it breaks, everything I thought I knew about loyalty, ambition, and my own strength will be tested in ways I never could have imagined. Have you ever felt the world shift beneath your feet, so suddenly that you're not even sure if you're standing or falling? That's how it began for me, the moment that split my life into before and after. It was a Tuesday. The kind of day that wears its ordinariness like a disguise. I'd barely slept the night before, still riding the adrenaline of that contract win, rehearsing in my mind how I'd answer when Jonathan finally acknowledged my work. I wore my favorite navy dress, the one that made me feel powerful, and I even allowed myself a rare treat, a caramel latte on the way to the office. I wanted to remember this day. But when I arrived, the air felt off, like the hush before a storm. My colleagues' eyes slid away as I walked past. There was a tension in the office and a brittle silence that made me shiver. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, big things were happening. An email popped up on my screen. Please come to conference room B at 10 a.m. No subject line, no explanation, just that. My heart skipped. I told myself it was probably about the contract, maybe even a celebration. I tried to believe it. When I walked in, Jonathan was already there, his face a mask of polite indifference. Next to him sat Danielle, the new VP of Operations, her posture perfect, her eyes cool and unreadable. There was no coffee, no smiles, no sign of celebration, only a stack of papers and the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Jonathan cleared his throat. Martha, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. I sat, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The room felt smaller than usual, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. Danielle spoke first, her voice smooth as glass. Martha, we want to thank you for your contributions to Orion Tech. You've been a valuable member of the team. I waited for the but. It came, sharp and clean. However, as we move into this new phase for the company, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position, effective immediately. It took a moment for the words to land. Eliminate. Not restructure, not promote, not even transfer. Just eliminate. I looked at Jonathan, searching for any sign of regret, any flicker of the camaraderie we'd built over late nights and impossible deadlines. But his eyes were cold, distant, as if I were already a memory. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Is this because of the contract? Because I thought... Jonathan cut me off. This isn't about your performance, Martha. It's about fit. The company is evolving, and we need to align our image with our future goals. Danielle nodded, her smile tight. We're looking for a certain pedigree. We appreciate your hard work, but we're moving in a different direction. Pedigree. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I felt my cheeks burn. All those years, all those sacrifices, reduced to a word that had nothing to do with my work and everything to do with where I came from. I wanted to scream, to demand they look me in the eye and admit what this really was. But I just sat there, frozen, my mind racing through every late night, every missed bedtime story, every time I'd swallowed my pride and kept going. The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. Danielle slid a severance packet across the table. Jonathan offered a limp handshake. We wish you the best, Martha. I walked out of that room in a daze, the world blurring around me. My colleagues avoided my gaze. My phone buzzed with emails about the contract. As if nothing had happened, I felt invisible, erased. The pain wasn't just professional, it was personal. I'd given so much of myself to this place, believing that hard work would be enough. I'd missed Ben's first piano recital, his parent-teacher conferences, all for a company that saw me as disposable. The humiliation was a physical ache, a cold stone in my chest. That night, after Ben was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the severance papers. My hands shook with anger and disbelief. How could they do this? How could they look at everything I'd accomplished and decide I wasn't enough? Not because of my work, but because of my story. I buried my face in my hands and let the tears come, quiet and bitter. I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by a tide of betrayal and self-doubt. But then, as I reached for a tissue, something slipped from a stack of old mail. It was a letter, addressed in my mother's handwriting. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it had gotten lost in the shuffle of bills and junk mail. My heart skipped as I opened it, the paper trembling in my hands. Inside, her words were simple but fierce. You are more than what they see. You are the sum of every fight you've survived, every dream you've dared to chase. Don't let anyone tell you your story is too small. It's yours, and it's powerful. I read those words over and over, letting them settle in my bones. My mother had known what it was to be overlooked, underestimated. She'd taught me to stand tall, even when the world tried to shrink me. That night, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, raw and throbbing, but beneath it, a small flame of defiance began to burn. I wasn't just a casualty of someone else's ambition. I was still Martha. I was still a mother, a fighter, a builder. They could take my job, but they couldn't take my worth. And as I sat there in the quiet, holding my mother's letter, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this ending was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine. If you've ever had your world collapse, you know there's a strange quiet that follows, the kind of silence that feels like standing in the eye of a hurricane. For me, the days after my dismissal from Orion Tech were a blur of numbness and disbelief. But what I didn't know was that, just beyond that hush, the world was about to roar back to life in ways I could never have predicted. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the severance packet like it might suddenly rewrite itself. When my phone buzzed, the caller ID flashed a name that made my heart leap, Tasha Williams. Tasha wasn't just any client, she was the client, the the one whose contract I'd fought for, whose trust I'd earned over months of careful listening and late-night strategy sessions. She was the reason Orion Tech had a shot at breaking into a new market. I answered, trying to steady my voice. "Hi, Tasha." She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Martha, I just heard what happened. Is it true? They let you go?" There was a pause, heavy with disbelief and anger. I swallowed hard, not trusting myself to speak. Tasha's voice sharpened. "I want you to know something. I didn't sign that contract with Orion. I signed it with you. If you're not there, neither is my business. I'm giving them 24 hours to fix this. Otherwise, I'm pulling the deal." For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. I'd spent so long feeling invisible, so long believing I was replaceable. And here was someone powerful, saying, "You matter. You're the reason this works." The next few hours were a whirlwind. My phone lit up with calls and emails from Orion. Jonathan, who had barely looked me in the eye as he fired me, now sounded frantic. "Martha, let's talk. Maybe there's a way to bring you back on, at least for the transition. The client is upset." Danielle, the new VP, sent a carefully worded email offering me a consulting opportunity, as if a new title could erase the sting of being discarded. They dangled money, flexibility, even hinted at a promotion down the line. But here's the thing, something inside me had changed. Maybe it was my mother's letter, her words echoing in my mind, reminding me that my worth was not up for negotiation. Maybe it was the memory of those sleepless nights, the birthdays missed, the way my son's face fell when I said, "Not tonight, honey, Mommy has to work." Maybe it was just the simple, stubborn truth that I was done begging for scraps of respect. I took a deep breath and called Tasha back. "Thank you for standing up for me," I said, "but I can't go back. Not even for a day. I need to do this on my own terms." Tasha's laugh was warm, full of admiration. "I was hoping you'd say that. Listen, I want to introduce you to someone. His name is Greg Wilson. He runs Wilson Enterprise Solutions. They're looking for someone exactly like you, someone who knows how to build something from the ground up." The next day, I met Greg in a sunlit corner office that overlooked the city. He was nothing like Jonathan. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind, and he listened, really listened, as I told him my story. He didn't ask about my pedigree or where I went to school. He asked about my ideas, my vision, what I wanted to build. "We need someone who can lead," he said. "Someone who's not afraid to shake things up. You've got the grit. Martha, I want you to come on board, not as an employee, but as a partner. You'll have autonomy, authority, and the chance to make a real impact." I felt something inside me crack open, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't being asked to fit into someone else's mold. I was being invited to shape my own. That night, after Ben was asleep, I sat down with my mother's letter again. I ran my fingers over the words, letting them sink in. "You are the sum of every fight you've survived, every dream you've dared to chase." I realized that I'd spent so much of my life waiting for someone else to validate me, to tell me I was enough. But maybe the only approval I really needed was my own. I thought about Orion Tech, about the way they'd tried to lure me back, not because they valued me, but because they feared losing what I'd built. I thought about Tasha, about Greg, about the chance to start fresh, to lead with integrity and courage. The decision wasn't easy. There was a part of me that wanted revenge, that wanted to march back into that office and prove them wrong. But I knew that real power wasn't about settling scores. It was about choosing myself on my own terms. So I called Greg. "I'm in," I said, "but only if I can do it my way." He laughed. "That's exactly what I want." The days that followed were a blur of excitement and fear. I handed in my severance papers, walked away from the company I'd given so much to, and stepped into a new world. At Wilson Enterprise Solutions, I was given the space to lead, to innovate, to build a team that valued grit and heart over pedigree and polish. I made a promise to myself and to my son that I would never again let anyone make me feel small. I would create a place where people like me, people who'd been overlooked and underestimated, could thrive. And as I stood in my new office, sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something new, something better, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming my power, my story, my worth. And as I looked out over the city, I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. You know, there's a moment when you realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're actually living. For me, that moment came the first time I walked into the offices of Wilson Enterprise Solutions, not as someone desperate for a job, but as the new business development director. I could feel the shift in the air, the way people looked at me, not with suspicion or condescension, but with genuine curiosity and respect. It was as if I'd finally stepped out of the shadows and into the light I'd been chasing for so long. But let me tell you, stepping into your power isn't as simple as flipping a switch. It's more like learning to walk again after years of crawling. My first days at Wilson were a blur of meetings, introductions, and strategy sessions. Greg, the CEO, made good on his promise. He gave me real authority, real autonomy. I wasn't just there to fill a seat. I was there to lead. The first big test came almost immediately. Tasha's contract, the very same deal that had gotten me fired from Orion, was now on my desk at Wilson. I remember sitting in the boardroom, sunlight pouring in through the windows, my heart pounding as I prepared to negotiate. The stakes were high, not just for me, but for the entire company. If we landed this deal, it would put Wilson on the map in a way that no marketing campaign ever could. But here's the thing. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I'd already lost everything I thought I couldn't live without, and I'd survived. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't about to let anyone silence it again. The negotiation was intense. Tasha was tough, but fair. She respected strength, not bravado. I listened more than I spoke, asked questions no one else had thought to ask, and made it clear that this wasn't just about numbers. It was about partnership, about building something that would last. When we finally shook hands, sealing the deal, I felt a surge of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't just a win for Wilson, it was a win for every woman who'd ever been told she was too ambitious, too emotional, too much. Word spread fast. Other clients started calling, curious about the new leadership at Wilson. They'd heard about what happened at Orion, about how I'd stood my ground. Some were looking for a fresh start themselves, tired of the same old corporate games. Within months, our client list doubled. We weren't just keeping up, we were setting the pace. Meanwhile, the fallout at Orion was brutal. Losing Tasha's contract was just the beginning. Other clients, emboldened by her stand, started asking hard questions. Why had they let me go? What did that say about their values? The press got wind of it, and soon Orion was scrambling to explain itself. The company that had once prided itself on innovation was now fighting to keep its doors open. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a certain satisfaction watching it all unfold. But more than that, I felt free. I was finally building something that reflected my values: respect, inclusion, honesty. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be underestimated, and I was determined that no one on my team would ever feel that way. At Wilson, I started a mentorship program for young professionals from non-traditional backgrounds. I made it a point to hire people who'd been overlooked elsewhere: single parents, immigrants, people who didn't have Ivy League degrees but had grit and heart. I wanted to create a place where ambition was celebrated, not punished. My leadership style was shaped by every scar I carried. I listened, really listened to my team. I encouraged them to speak up, to challenge me, to bring their whole selves to work. I remembered what it felt like to have your ideas dismissed, so I made sure credit was always given where it was due. I set high standards, but I also made it clear that failure was part of the process, not something to be ashamed of. The culture at Wilson began to change. People started taking risks, sharing ideas, supporting each other. There was a sense of energy, of possibility, that I'd never felt at Orion. We celebrated wins, learned from losses, and grew stronger together. As the months passed, Greg began to step back, giving me more and more responsibility. One day, he called me into his office and closed the door behind him. "Martha," he said, "I've been thinking about the future of this company. I want you to take over as CEO." I was stunned. For a moment, I saw my younger self sitting in the back of the room, hoping someone would notice me, terrified of being too much, and now, here I was, being asked to lead an entire company. I said yes, of course. Not because I wanted the title, but because I knew I could make a difference. I wanted to prove to myself, to my son, to every woman who'd ever been told to sit down and be quiet, that you can rise from the ashes and build something better. The day I moved into the CEO's office, I brought with me my mother's letter. I framed it and placed it on my desk, a reminder of where I came from and what I stood for. I called Ben and told him, "We did it, kiddo. We really did it." His laughter on the other end of the line was the sweetest victory of all. Looking back, I realized that every setback, every betrayal, every sleepless night was preparing me for this. I learned that power isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It's about lifting others up as you climb, about turning your pain into purpose. Wilson Enterprise Solutions became more than just a company. It became a movement. We proved that you don't have to play by the old rules to win. You can lead with compassion, with integrity, with heart, and when you do, people notice. They want to be part of it. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever been told you're too much, or not enough, or that your story doesn't matter, hear me now. You are the author of your own life. Don't wait for someone else to hand you a pen. Take it, write your story, and make it one worth telling. Because sometimes, the very thing that breaks you is the thing that sets you free. And when you finally rise, you don't just change your own life, you light the way for others to follow. You know, sometimes the universe has a way of circling back, tying up loose ends in ways you never expected. Months had passed since I'd taken the helm at Wilson, and life had settled into a new, steady rhythm. I was still learning, still growing, but for the first time in years, I felt whole, like I was finally living in a story I'd written for myself. Then, one morning, as I was reviewing proposals in my office, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line was simple: Orion Tech, update. I hesitated, my heart skipping just a little before clicking it open. The message was short and to the point. Jonathan had resigned. Orion Tech, once the darling of the industry, was in shambles, clients gone, reputation in tatters, the company a shadow of what it had been. I sat back in my chair, letting the news wash over me. I thought I'd feel triumphant, maybe even a little vindictive, but what I felt instead was a quiet sense of closure. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge, just a deep professional satisfaction. The truth had come full circle, and I was free. It's strange, the things you remember in moments like that. I found myself thinking about my mother's letter, about the nights I'd sat at my kitchen table, wondering if I'd ever be enough. I thought about Ben, about the way his eyes lit up when I told him about my new job, about the future we were building together, and I thought about the people who had stood by me: Tasha, Greg, my team at Wilson, people who saw my worth long before the world ever did. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about one woman's rise after a fall. It was about resilience, the kind that grows in the cracks, that refuses to be stamped out, no matter how many times life tries to flatten you. It was about the power of allies, of women supporting women, of people who lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. It was about the wisdom we inherit and the legacy we choose to leave. Word of my story began to spread, first within the industry, then beyond. I started getting messages from women all over the country, women who had been overlooked, underestimated, told they were too much or not enough. They wrote to say that my story had given them hope, had reminded them that their value wasn't tied to a title or a pedigree, but to their courage, their integrity, their willingness to keep going even when the world said stop. Sometimes, I'd pause in the middle of a busy day, look around my office, and let it all sink in. On the wall behind my desk, framed and proud, hung my state school diploma, a simple piece of paper, but to me, a badge of honor. It was a reminder that what matters most isn't where you start, but how you choose to finish. That true value comes not from the names on your resume, but from the character you build in the fire. And every so often, I'd take out my mother's letter, the ink a little faded now, but the message as clear as ever. You are more than what they see, you are the sum of every fight you've survived. Those words became my compass, my anchor, my promise to myself and to every woman who would come after me. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt small or invisible, if you've ever been told you don't belong, know this: you are not defined by what others take from you. but by what you choose to build for yourself and those who follow. Your story matters, your voice matters, and the world is waiting for you to rise. Because healing isn't just about mending what's broken, it's about discovering the strength you never knew you had. It's about turning wounds into wisdom, pain into power, and endings into beginnings. And in the end, that's the legacy I hope to leave, not just as a CEO or a mother, but as a woman who refused to be broken, who chose to build, and who lit the way for others to do the same.